for anybody looking to innovate for China, I would give 3 pieces of advice. I think the first one really is to start out with a blank piece of paper when you're looking at China. The stakeholder landscape in China is extremely fragmented. So a lot of times when you're thinking about designing a new product, we tend to focus primarily on the end user. Okay, so it's either a doctor or it's a patient or it's a nurse. The challenge in China is that the end user, in 9 out of 10 times, is also not the decision maker. And the decision maker is also usually not the payer. So when you think about a healthcare system like China and you talk about stakeholders, there's really, in my mind, sort of these buckets of stakeholders. The first being, okay, healthcare professional, patient, that everybody knows. But the decision makers ultimately typically are the hospital presidents. And the hospital presidents are incentivized or have a very, very different viewpoint in terms of what they're hoping to get out of a solution. In turn, the ultimate payer of a new solution may or may not be the government. In some cases, it could actually be, distribution companies. It could be other companies within the healthcare industry that are interested to actually fund things for the hospital. And then, of course, you've got the government, right? So the stakeholder landscape requires you to actually really understand in every solution that you're designing for a market like China, what the incentives are for different people within that ecosystem. And solutions that ultimately are valuable are ones that are able to touch as many stakeholders as possible. Because I've seen tons of instances where great companies have designed products that have good intentions. So they've designed a product, I'll give you an example, nurse safety. Obviously you want the nurse to be safe, but then the question is, the nurse always says, well, the doctor's not going to pay for that, neither is the patient. So you could come up with the best product for nurses, develop it, and yet it's not going to get purchased. Not because it wasn't a good product, not because you didn't identify a need, but simply because you didn't understand the incentives for the decision makers and the payers. So, I always encourage people, I think when you're looking at a market like China, to really make sure that you map out all the stakeholders within that landscape and really truly understand what drives their behavior. The second thing that I would say also for innovators to think about is a question of whether or not the solutions that you're coming up with can actually scale for a population that is as big as China, right? Here in the US, to a large extent, you get away with being able to design things for certain segments of the market. I think in China, you do have to start thinking about sizes of market segments, and to a large extent, your ability to succeed in that market actually does require you to actually be able to scale a solution beyond 100 million people to, let's say, 500 million. So, as we talk about the cost of healthcare, one of the big differences between China and the US is that in China, people are still paying out of pocket for lots of different types of technologies. So technologies that we take for granted or solutions that we take for granted here in the US, patients don't have access to that. And to a large extent, therefore, your ability to penetrate the Chinese market actually requires you to have affordability as a primary metric that you're also thinking about as you're designing new solutions for the market. I think the final point or tip to innovators is to really go spend some time in the market. I mean, it's very hard to innovate for a market that you don't understand or you see from far away, because until you're actually living there or, visiting and actually going there and doing on-the-ground market research work, it's all theoretical. So those would be the 3 pieces of advice that I would give to anybody interested to innovate for China.